Saturday?
Every Thursday, yes.
Oh, today's Thursday. See, when you're retired, every day seems like Saturday. Now, do I need this to be here? Or
Yeah,
I
you
sit-
can push it down.
I can sit like this?
Yeah.
Is that good enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome to Cafe Latino. We have a special guest today that will enlighten us with so much information that you will have to sit down and take notes. His name is Arthur Purves. Arthur, good to see you here.
Hi, Laura. Thanks so much for having me.
You can put your headset if you want it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I have been doing radio for approximately 10 years. And I invite people just to share issues. I like to invite people to feel like we can communicate with the community.
Well, I appreciate that, Laura, because I have a lot of issues to share.
Yeah, and I know that. So, well, the first thing I would like to share with the community is tell us a little about yourself. Where did you born? What did you study?
So I was born in Munich, Germany. My father worked for the State Department in the occupation of Germany after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
We moved to Washington, D.C. in 1953. I went to Washington, D.C. public schools through the 8th grade.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to a private school for high school. I went to St. Albans, which, by the way, is a school that Al Gore attended. So I went to high school with Al Gore.
Look at that. And that is a boys' school?
Yeah, it's on the campus of the Washington Cathedral.
Oh, wow.
We had our 50th reunion a couple of years ago of our graduating class of 50. 22 showed up, and we were given a questionnaire,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the questions was rate Barack Obama,
Mm-hmm.
and the other was to rate Donald Trump.
Wow.
And of the 22 alumni at the reunion, there were 21 votes ranking Obama as the greatest, and only 1 vote ranking him as not great.
Incredible. You see?
Yeah, I had very liberal classmates. I've actually been debating politics since we moved here, and since kindergarten.
Wow.
I've always been a conservative, and Washington D.C. is in general a liberal place, and I've just had 60 years of fun. I love doing this.
Unbelievable.
So then I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and then the second semester of my junior year, I took my first course in computer programming, and I loved it. I couldn't believe that you could have so much fun and get a college credit. So
Wow.
I got a job I was a programmer for 40 years, never worked a day in my life, always enjoyed every day of it.
In that time, they were the cards that you...
The punch cards.
The punch cards,
That's
yeah.
right, yeah. When I saw a punch card machine, my first punch card machine, I thought I'd seen the ultimate in rocket science. It was,
Yeah, the people, many people doesn't know, but when I began studying computer science, they were the punch cards. And you had to,
yeah,
first of all, you had to develop the program, no, the
Right.
software. And one time I used Pascal was the software,
your language?
the language that I used.
I did Fortran.
Okay.
I'm
And then I remember that then once you finish there, then you send it, and they make the cards, the
Yeah.
calls, and then you have to send it to another part to be read the
Right.
cards.
Well, yeah, I typed my own punch cards, and then you had a deck of cards.
Oh
and,
yes,
and if you dropped the deck
that- I want
on
to
the
say
ground, you were in trouble.
because there's no numbers. It was just cards.
You could number them, I think, there were sorting machines, so if you did put a number in, you could sort them. But anyway, I want to get on to
Yeah, absolutely.
what's going on today.
So you got involved in politics since you were very little. What are the first thing that comes to your mind about politics that you really, get
Laura-
upset of? What I mean?
Okay, Laura, I've basically been running on the same issue for 24 years. By the way, this is my my 8th run for office.
Tell us what you're running for. Can you
Okay,
share with the
oh yeah,
community?
that's, so I'm running for state senate in the 32nd district, which is mainly Reston, but it was gerrymandered by my opponent, who was elected 28 years ago. So she gerrymandered this district so that it actually includes some liberal districts in Arlington. So it stretches from Reston
Wow.
down to Arlington. But there's a few connecting precincts in McLean and Vienna
That's crazy.
and Falls Church. I think there's one precinct in Oakton. The district, she gerrymandered it so that Democrats win 70% of the vote
Mm-hmm.
in her district.
Okay. So you've been running 7 times, and you always focus in one issue. Tell us about it.
Ending racial inequality in our public schools.
Mhm.
So now I'm running at the state level. People need to understand that the Constitution of Virginia gives the General Assembly the responsibility to provide a quality education in primary and secondary schools.
Mm-hmm.
Actually in college too.
Wow.
And they're not doing it. The quality of education in the state of Virginia is mediocre. It's a little better in Fairfax County, but it's still not that great. Just to give you an example, the average SAT score for a Virginia student is at the 62nd percentile, which means that 62% of the students who take the SAT score below the average student. Now, by contrast, the average SAT percentile of a freshman going to the University of Virginia is at the 95th percentile.
Wow.
That's excellent. So for the average student going to the University of Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
that average student scores higher than 95% of the students who take the SAT. So the average Virginia SAT is way below that. You can't get into the University of Virginia, you can't get into Virginia Tech, you can't get into George Mason or James Madison. You can get into a bunch of colleges, but they have 4-year graduation rates of 45%.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what's even worse is the racial inequality, which has been going on for decades, where African Americans score way below Hispanics, who score below whites, who score below Asians. And I'm running, and I have been running to fix it. And the fix is pretty straightforward. We can raise the achievement of the minorities by bringing back intensive phonics instead of the whole word approach, which the schools use nationwide. Bringing back arithmetic drill. The schools despise drill. They call it drill and kill when it's actually drill and skill. Bring back history instead of social studies, and then bring back the 10 Commandments. Instead of what the left wants to do, which is more tax hikes, busing, boundary changes, and put police in schools.
So, what do you think was the reason to remove phonics from the studies? And what is the think is the reason?
I am so glad you asked. Okay, this happened a century ago,
Mm-hmm.
and the responsible party is a fellow by the name of John Dewey, and this is not to be confused with the Dewey of the Dewey Decimal System used in libraries.
Okay.
This is a different guy. He was a professor at Columbia Teachers College from 1904 to 1930, and he was a socialist, and he was an atheist. And basically, he wanted this to become a socialist country. And so he developed a new education curricula, which is called progressive education. And he and his colleagues at the Columbia Teachers College designed this new progressive education where they threw out phonics and replaced it with whole word. So phonics, you teach children how to sound out, learn how to pronounce words by sounding out the
Yes.
letters in the words. Whole word doesn't teach anything at all. It just presents students with words, and you're supposed to memorize the words. And Laura, I lived this. When I was in first grade in DC public schools, I remember our teacher put the letters A-N-D on the board, and she gave us the letter sounds, A, N, and D, and she said, now if you say those sounds really close together, you'll know what that word is. And so all around the classroom, kids were going, and then people lit up as they realized this was the word and. I remember it well because I was the last one in the classroom to figure out it was and. But it was like a revelation. I had no clue that you could figure out what a word was by sounding out the letters. And then she said, and this is where John Dewey came in, but I am not supposed to teach you this.
Unbelievable.
and we were handed Dick and Jane readers, which were part of the progressive curriculum. The Dick and Jane readers had no phonics whatsoever. Instead, they had pictures, and you're supposed to guess the meaning of words by looking at the pictures. This causes dyslexia. What John Dewey did was he gave us a reading program that has created a nation of somewhere between 14 million and 40 million dyslexics, an epidemic of ADD and ADHD, which is often associated with reading and learning disabilities, and a new industry called remedial reading. Then Dewey said that drill was evil. And so you're not supposed to learn the multiplication tables. You're not supposed to learn your basic arithmetic facts. So, Laura, I was actually a scoutmaster for a small Hispanic troop in our church. You know, maybe at its height we had a dozen boys.
Yeah.
I remember I was working with one of them who was in middle school. This is long enough ago that I forget who the boy was, okay?
Yes.
And we were planning a camp out. And there were 9 people going on the camp out, and we were planning the menu, and we decided that we'd buy enough hamburger for each of the 9 people to have half a pound of hamburger. So I said, how many pounds of hamburger can we buy? He couldn't give me the answer.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks to John Dewey. And then history.
Oh, that's another thing. I just can't believe it.
No, we don't know history. Well, he crowded out history with social studies, and it's no accident that he was a socialist, and he introduced social studies. And you can look at the Virginia Board of Education Standards of Learning for early elementary school, where you're learned to compromise, you know, how to work in a group, how to make your own moral decisions so you don't have to listen to the decisions of your parents. And history, you know, for our founding fathers in, I don't know, first or second grade, they say to learn about the people associated with Washington's birthday. It doesn't even mention, you know, learn about James Madison or George Mason or Thomas Jefferson. And basically what the real goal of social studies is to remove any reference to divine intervention from our history. And of course he was an atheist, so he wanted God out. When I went to Washington, D.C. public schools, we began every morning with the Lord's Prayer. Except, so what they did was they assigned every student a day to decide what we would do for opening. And when the students didn't care, we said the Lord's Prayer. However, there were some Jewish students, and they did care. So on their day, they generally read some verses from the Old Testament. Well, John Dewey thought that was bad. And so he was accommodated by the Supreme Court, which in the 60s, there was a case that made the Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional to say the Lord's Prayer in the classroom. That this was a case brought forth by a Madeline Murray O'Hare. And actually I heard her son speak, the son for whom she brought the case to the Supreme Court. And he's a reborn Christian now, and he's spending his life trying to undo what his mother did. And I heard him speak. He's absolutely fascinating. He wrote a book called My Life with Atheism, I think. And but anyway, he pointed out that the school he attended, where they were saying the Lord's Prayer, was a technical school. You know, kids had slide rules. Nobody knows what those are, but those were what hand calculators, what you had before you had hand calculators. And you know, students went to engineering schools. He said now his school is a police station. That, you know, that is what happens when you take the Judeo-Christian faith out of your culture. The restrictions, the limits, the strength on behavior, the strength to control your temper, to forgive. You drive out that influence, and so now you get violence and gun violence.
Absolutely.
We could talk about guns. And
It's just a tremendous. Let's play. Yeah, let me just put I have to put an announcement. We come back in a second. Let me just, every 15 minutes I have to put an announcement.
Sure, you bet.
Listening to Radio Fairfax. You are Fairfax County's
So one of
public
the
access.
problems is I can keep talking without you asking questions. So you've
I
got
know.
you've
I
got
have
to interrupt and.
I know I do it. I will do it.
Okay.
I will do it. Don't worry about it. So
Because I haven't explained how I know this will work.
we was just learning about the history at the in one moment they remove it. So they remove history, they remove phonics.
And arithmetic drill and
And
God.
arithmetic. So that was removed, and now it exists a possibility to fix it.
Oh, yeah, but you gotta like people who do it.
Of course.
But you have to advocate it. I mean, you've got to tell people what the problem is and what the solution is. And,
Yeah.
and I've been doing this for 24 years, and the problem is all the white voters say, oh, Arthur, you don't care about my children.
Because they think you care only for the minorities that have.
But the
struggled.
fact is, the education that's wrecking the future of African American and Hispanic children is
Yeah.
actually harming a lot of white and Asian children too.
But the people think that this achievement is only for white and African Americans, and I'm very sure
Say
that
it again, people what?
the people think that it's only Hispanics and African Americans.
That are
but
harmed.
But I believe there's a lot of Caucasians there,
Yeah.
and the people doesn't want to see that.
That's right.
So the Caucasians go to college and they cannot finish college. They're not successful there when they try.
40% graduate, 45% graduation. Yeah. You know, if primary and secondary schools were what they were, your high school senior would know more than today's college graduate.
Of course. So we have a problem, no? Because the kids are not prepared
Okay,
to.
we're not on the air, right?
Yeah, we are there.
We're on the air
Yeah.
now? Okay.
Yeah.
I see a red light on you.
You are
Okay.
So no, we are there. So it's a big issue, no? So coming back to, learning this, let's talk about more about the numbers, no? How it looks like the numbers.
Sure, okay. So the trend that you see, okay, so this racial inequality
Yes.
is very visible in SAT scores, in
Mhm.
high school SAT
Yes.
scores, both in Fairfax County, but even more so in Virginia, where his African Americans score below Hispanics, who score below whites, who score below Asians. Now here's the thing, Laura. You see the same trend in the 4th grade reading and arithmetic scores, which means that our elementary schools are not teaching reading and arithmetic successfully in early elementary school. And Laura, if you haven't learned reading by 4th grade, your economic future is ruined.
Because they're not able to read math. You don't know how to read,
Mhm.
you will be unable to do math.
Well, but also if you haven't learned your basic math facts by
Yes.
4th grade, adding and multiplication, then your technical future is ruined also.
Mhm.
So you cannot, the people who understood the importance of reading best were the slaveholders before the Civil War, where they said it was illegal to teach a slave to read for fear that if a slave learned how to read,
Yes.
they could become independent. That's how serious it is. So today, when you don't teach reading, and a lot of white and Asian children don't learn either, and they get reading
Yes. disabilities,
their economic future is ruined.
So what comment about that is interesting because in Mexico there is so much control of the government, and in Latin America that they don't teach them to read. So because they want to control,
That was exactly John Dewey's strategy. He wanted this country to be socialist, and so the best way to do it was to dumb down the curricula.
Of
So
course.
now, he had a laboratory school at Columbia University,
Mhm.
and he received a lot of funding from John D. Rockefeller Jr., who sent 4 of his sons there. All 4 of his sons developed dyslexia.
Look at
So
that.
Dewey and Nelson Rockefeller, the best known of his sons, who was
Mhm.
vice president, I think under Gerald Ford,
Mhm.
he had dyslexia from John Dewey's whole word reading. So Dewey knew that this didn't work. Yet he and his buddies at Columbia Teachers College trained teachers who became school superintendents all around the nation. They adopted the Dick and Jane readers, and they adopted the drill-free arithmetic, and in 13 years of school, from kindergarten through 12th grade, you get 3 years of American history. In Fairfax County, you get in 6th and 7th grade, and then in 11th grade. What happens between 7th grade and 11th grade? You forget everything you learned in 7th
Of
grade,
course.
right? So our students don't know American history, and the same thing with world history. You get 2 or 3 years of world history, and And he didn't want you to know history. He didn't want you to be able to be a scientist or a mathematician. He didn't want you to be able to read, to be an independent thinker, to check the facts. And Laura, it's working.
Of course.
Look how it took a century. He was a patient guy, but look how our schools are now turning out socialists
Totally.
who are now taking over the Democrat Party.
Yes.
And the country really doesn't have an argument, against them. But I've got an argument against them because what Dewey did was he ruined he condemned, okay, going back a step. So all African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, whites and Asians are
Yes.
all taught this fake curriculum,
Yes.
okay? However, the more affluent parents, the Asians and the whites, can send their children to after-school
money.
programs or teach them at home, so you have a higher success rate.
But because they have the money to pay tutoring
Right.
outside the schools.
That's right.
Yes.
Or they're not doing 4 jobs to pay for their apartment, and so
Absolutely.
they have time to teach the ability to teach their children at
That
home.
is the secret why they are that.
That's why they
Mhm.
succeed.
Mhm.
So Dewey's curriculum savagely discriminates against the low-income parents. Who are generally Hispanic and white. And so if you want to see what John Dewey's socialism has done for the United
Mhm.
States, and you want to see AOC's socialist paradise, go to West Baltimore, go to North Philadelphia. That is their socialist paradise where people are trapped in poverty
Exactly.
and they become dependent on the government.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have decades in the school board and decades in that the thing has not been changed, and people doesn't know about the level of ignorance. That we have so many schools that are really, really bad.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we talk about high schools. What is the situation of the high schools here in Northern Virginia?
Oh, what a great question, Laura. So, the college board publishes a report which gives the SAT score of every high school, okay? And I find it more convenient, more useful to convert the scores to percentiles.
Okay.
So, and the quality, we have about 25 high schools in Fairfax County,
25.
and the quality of education in those high schools varies dramatically. So Thomas Jefferson, the average student's SAT score is at the 99th percentile.
Let's talk about for a second for Thomas Jefferson. What is the race?
Oh yeah, Thomas Jefferson is 60% Asian,
Exactly.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at Mount Vernon, the average SAT score is at the 47th percentile.
Mm-hmm.
47th percentile, you can get into a couple of colleges, but you won't last.
Yes.
So anyway, Thomas Jefferson, 99th percentile, Langley, 88th percentile, McLean, 87th, Oakton, 82nd. I'll skip a few. Marshall, 79th, Robinson, 76th, West Springfield, 73,
Mm-hmm.
South County, 70th, Falls Church, 65th, Hayfield, 60th. So,
I think we go to the Annandale when 60% of the students are Hispanic, I think.
Oh yeah. Well, so 4 years ago, Karen Gies Kamara was
Uh-huh.
running for school board, and I
Yes.
went to the League of Women Voters Forum.
Yes.
And at League of Women Voters Forum, you write down your question on a card, and then they may or may not ask
Yes.
it. Well, they happened to ask my question, which was, why does academic achievement vary so much from high school to high school?
Yeah, that
And
makes
the
sense.
question was posed to Karen Gies Kamara.
Uh-huh.
She stood there silent for 10 seconds.
Wow.
And then she said, in all honesty, we don't know why it
Unbelievable.
varies. And she is on the school board and running for re-election.
Exactly.
I asked the same question at, I think, the Mason District
Uh-huh.
Forum, where Sandy Evans was
Yes.
running for re-election. And my question there was a little different. My question was, why is it that Fairfax County in 30 years has still failed to close the
The
minority
achievement
student
gap.
achievement gap?
Mhm.
And Sandy Evans stood up there and said, to tell you the truth, we don't know how to close that gap.
Absolutely.
And if we knew how to close that gap, we would be millionaires.
Yeah. And it's interesting, no? Because they think with the one Fairfax they will close the achievement gap. Moving the students from one school to another.
One Fairfax is a stunning admission by Fairfax County Democrats on the Board of Supervisors and on the school board that all their attempts to achieve racial equality are a failure. But now we know what causes racial inequality. It is the progressive education curriculum that is a religion to them. And oh, by the way, Sandy Evans, who said we have no idea
Yes.
how to close the minority
Unbelievable.
student achievement gap, became chairman of the Fairfax County School Board. And by the way, the League of Women Voters was videotaping all of these forums.
Yes.
And I was really looking forward to seeing on the internet
Yeah.
the future chairman of the Fairfax County School Board saying we have no
Yeah.
idea how to close. Guess what?
They remove it.
They had technical difficulties
Of
with their
course.
videoing, and it never made it on the
Yeah,
internet.
so it doesn't make sense to try to worsen kids. They're in poverty.
Well,
It's so stupid.
by the way, let's say one more thing about this racial
Yeah,
inequality
totally.
in the United States. AOC is blaming it on the founding fathers,
Oh, unbelievable.
when the blame belongs with AOC, a progressive, and her progressive education curriculum. And my opponent, Janet Howe, identifies herself as a progressive. For 28 years, one of her principal goals has been to funnel more and more money into the school system, which creates racial inequality and ruins the economic future of low-income African Americans and Hispanics, and many whites and Asians.
Yeah, not everybody had money. Just it's not about the color of the skin. You know, we have tons of white kids that are working as a waitress, are doing things after having these loans. You know, this doesn't make sense.
If we had the curriculum that taught millions of Americans how to
Yes.
read and do arithmetic during the 1800s, we would no longer need to make graphs and charts showing academic achievement by ethnic group, because they would all be high. So one Fairfax.
Let's go back one
Okay,
for first,
yeah.
because the people that listen to us, they have to understand that they try to be the solution of everything.
Well, these liberal Democrats have a
Uh-huh.
30-year record of failure
Absolutely.
in trying to create racial equality,
Mhm.
and this will be just another failure, and here's why. What good does it bus a child from one school that teaches a bad curriculum to another school which teaches the same bad curriculum?
Exactly.
And in fact,
What is the difference? You know what I mean?
it won't work. In fact, we already have schools that are diverse, that already have what they would call racial equity, and you get the same achievement gap. In fact, my son went to Marshall, and basically what they did at Marshall was they lowered the standards.
Mhm.
My son quickly realized at Marshall, now let me disclose, he graduated in '96, so we're
Mhm.
talking about over 20 years ago, but
Yes.
I maintain that things haven't changed. He quickly learned he could do nothing and graduate.
Exactly. Because there's no zeros, they don't fail. They just want to send everybody out of the high school.
Well, if the school fails a lot of students, then people would correctly conclude that the school is a failure.
Absolutely.
An interesting thing about One Fairfax is they're not even advertising that this busing and boundary changes will raise academic achievement. Their goal isn't to raise academic, their goal is just to have the same percentages in every school, and it won't work.
Something very important, I was talking with this Hispanic woman, she said, you know, Laura, we moved to this neighborhood because this school will provide everything that we need, and now they're saying that my son had to go to another school. I don't have a car.
Yeah.
If something happened to my son, how am I going to move immediately to see where he is? So moving students for their own community is going to be the worst thing can happen to them, because these people does not have the resources to to do what they think they will be sold.
Destroying the neighborhood.
Exactly.
Our daughter was accepted at Thomas Jefferson.
Mhm.
She almost didn't go there because she wanted to go to the neighborhood high school.
Mhm. Kids, I noticed something here in Fairfax, I listened that the kids go to the kindergarten together, they finish high school together, the families know each other. It's just something that's so unique. And then now you're going to move it everything just to have a few poor Latinos in another school that doesn't have any? Doesn't make sense.
Right, and as I said, their 30-year record in trying to achieve racial equality has been a failure. By the way, you know what was the origin of One Fairfax?
No, tell me more.
Years ago, they took a look at the statistics of who was in the juvenile detention center.
Oh my.
And African American and Hispanic students were disproportionately represented.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I forget the percentages. Maybe African Americans were 10% of the county population, but 30% of the prison population, and Hispanics were maybe 15% of the county and 30% of the prison population. So they correctly realized that there was inequality. So, you know, they spent a few years coming up with a solution, and they'll do everything but fix the problem, which is, if now it is true that some schools are overcrowded. I think McLean is overcrowded.
Yeah.
And
Langley is undercrowded.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a logistic reason for moving the students.
Yes.
But you know, the parents are worried about, the Langley parents are worried about having a more diverse, student membership.
Yes.
But Laura, if we taught this, went back to the curriculum that taught millions of Americans how to, make this a great country during the 1800s, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter the race of who was in your school. They would all be doing great, and then you'd achieve the real ideal of the public schools, which is to be a mixing bowl of, I'm going to use diversity in a positive sense here.
Absolutely.
This is what we want. We do want to take advantage of the diversity.
Yeah.
I actually share the progressive goals, a number of the progressive goals of my opponent, right? To take advantage of diversity, to end racial inequality, to end gun violence. But her solutions don't work. Her solution is to raise taxes. She voted to raise the real estate tax, the sales tax from 4.5% to 5%, from 5% to 6%, which sort of gets into the dollar issues here,
Yes.
okay? When my opponent was elected 28 years ago, Virginia spent $4 billion a year on education and $4 billion a year on individual and family services, which is where the welfare spending is and which is where Medicaid is. To keep up with population and inflation growth, those budgets needed to increase from $4 billion 28 years ago to $10 billion last year.
Oh, wow.
Needed to increase to 10 billion, keep up with population inflation.
Yes.
Well, education increased to 15 billion. Individual and family services increased to 17 billion.
Wow.
That is 12 billion extra dollars.
Unbelievable.
Schools that don't teach, schools with this fake curriculum, they're expensive. You have to have lots of special ed teachers. You have to deal with learning disabilities. You have to deal more with behavioral problems, with ADD, with more IEPs.
Yeah.
And then the poverty caused by this progressive education, and by the way, I'll say that the racial inequality in the United States is caused by the public schools. Maybe I said that before, but bears repeating. But the poverty caused by the public schools then drives up poverty spending, drives up. Instead of expanding Medicaid, what they really should have done was teach reading so low-income children can get good jobs. And that's the interesting thing about Medicaid expansion, right? It keeps the poor in poverty.
Exactly.
It still allows the hospitals to charge outrageous prices to people who aren't insured. So Medicaid, and then it damages the economy because it diverts more money from the private sector to government.
Yes.
Okay. And it doesn't solve the underlying problem.
We go back to like a circle. Like, go back to the same problem
Well,
again and again.
Milton Friedman said it pretty well. He said government is always fixing what it just did.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So, government got involved in healthcare
Mhm.
and
Messed it up.
and it's a disaster. There's a Dr. Stephen Shortell, who is Dean Emeritus of the Berkeley School of Public Health.
Mhm.
So he's from California. So whatever he says has got to be true,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
So he has this fascinating article he wrote right after Obamacare passed,
Yes.
and he pointed out that health outcomes are determined 50% by lifestyle, 20% by environment,
Mhm.
20% by heredity, and only 10% by access to medical insurance. So his point was that Obamacare really wasn't going to do much to improve the health of anybody. Okay?
So it's just so incredible.
If the Democrats, if the progressives were really interested in health,
Yes.
instead of just expanding government, their nirvana, okay, then they would be emphasizing nutrition.
Yeah, exactly.
We Americans are being poisoned by. Okay, so yesterday I picked up an empty Coke bottle
Mhm.
that was somebody had thrown on my property.
Yeah.
It was empty, and I looked at the ingredients.
Uh-huh.
This Coke bottle had 70 grams of sugar.
Yes.
That is 17 teaspoons of sugar.
Yes.
Sodas are diabetes juice.
And the numbers of people diabetic is increasing tremendously.
Well, because we have sugared,
Addiction.
processed. My wife was on dialysis,
Mhm.
and so at the dialysis center they have a nutritionist, and the nutritionist pointed out to me that low-income people in this country live in what's called nutritional deserts.
Yes.
They do not have a store where they can buy fresh fruits and vegetables. And probably, if there were a store that had fresh fruits and vegetables, they may not be able to afford it.
Because they're so expensive.
Yeah. Progressivism, AOC, John Dewey, consign people to poverty, consign people to sickness, and basically this is what my opponent and the Democrats, and actually I wish the Republicans were more articulate on this issue, to tell you the truth.
So we facing a problem, no? We have these liberals that wants to have more control and government, and in the other side, the Republicans, they still don't understand
That's
the
right.
issues.
That's
So we
right.
we are a little tiny pot of people that wants to make changes, and it doesn't come along. My son went to Montessori school. When I moved to Georgia, the schools were bad, so they're really, really bad. My son was always in trouble, so I put him in Montessori school. And in Montessori school, they didn't teach you anything, they just phonics. He come back and he had to, he come back with the cards and we have to practice the sounds. And he taught them how to write cursive.
Yeah.
He didn't, it was amazing the way, it was incredible. My son began to read late, but when he began to read, he consumed books like thick books, like, the Harry
Yeah.
Potter in 4 or 5 days. And he still is 25 years old now,
Uh-huh.
and he's still buying books and collections of books, series of books, and he reads when he travels, when he has time. What a difference.
Montessori is simply wonderful.
Oh.
And so why don't our public schools adopt Montessori?
Exactly.
And actually, Prince George's County at least did. I think they still had a couple of magnet Montessori schools. My brother's mother-in-law taught in one of those. She
In DC, there's also a Montessori school.
public
Yeah,
public Montessori.
Yeah. It's a charter school, but it's a.
Arlington has one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my brother's mother-in-law,
Mhm.
who taught in this Montessori program in a low-income school in
Mhm.
Prince George's County,
Yeah.
and the purpose of the Montessori program was to attract affluent students to the school to raise the average scores of the school.
Unbelievable.
Well, then the local low-income parents got the sense that there was something going on in this
Yeah.
class, and they finally started putting their kids in. Anyway, she is a liberal's liberal, my friend.
Yes.
I called her up, and because I have been campaigning on this issue for 24, I've run,
I
this is my
know.
8th run, okay?
Yeah, and you always keep it the same concept.
Yeah, and you know, I've lost 7 times, and in the 70%, I'm running in a progressive district. If they want to achieve progressive goals, they should elect me, and if they want more money for transportation, then they should elect me so we can cut the way you cut taxes, Laura, is you do not cut welfare programs for people who are dependent on them. The way you cut taxes is what Trump did with food stamps. He got people's jobs, so people got off of food stamps. You have to lower the demand for the welfare program so people don't ask for them anymore. And the way you do that is you teach them how to read. So anyway,
Everything goes back to the reading part that is so necessary. Now we are in worse trouble now that the kids using technology all the time. There are no more books. The schools don't send books to reading. I remember my son when he went 8 years behind the other one, he comes with books, he had to read books, he got to do reports. My second son, I never seen reading a book.
And so the parents don't know what's going on.
Exactly, there's no transparency.
And now they're at the at-large school board debate at the government center,
Yes.
you know, for the at-large. Cheryl Buford did feel that issue really, really well, because she has a background in education administration, and she was able to cite districts that had gone to this Fairfax, you know, one computer for everybody. It
Yes.
did nothing to raise
Nothing.
achievement.
No.
What raises achievement is teaching reading, is having arithmetic drill, is teaching real history, acknowledging the hand of God in the freedoms and the creation
Yeah.
of this country. There's so many just for one example of the hand of God, okay?
Yes.
Hopefully your listeners are familiar with Washington's attack on Trenton on Christmas Day in 1776, where he captured 1,600 Hessian soldiers. Before Washington made that attack, he had lost 95% of his army.
Wow.
In the first year of the Revolutionary War, the British thought they had won, the colonists thought they had lost.
Mhm.
Washington was going to lose half of the rest of his army at the end of December because enlistments were expiring. He was desperate, so he launched this surprise attack on the small Hessian outpost in Trenton, New Jersey. He crossed the Delaware River in a snowstorm. There were spies everywhere. The Hessians knew that Washington was going to attack. They had their pickets out to watch for the attack. And then there came a northeaster. It rained, it snowed, it hailed, the winds blew, and the Hessians said, nobody is going to do an attack in this weather. And they took back their pickets. Washington led his troops, you know, bleeding, barefoot, and the surprise worked. The Hessians were totally surprised. He captured 1,600 prisoners, and after that battle, Laura, the British were not sure they could win the war.
Look at that.
And I could give you so many other examples where there was divine intervention to create this country
Yeah.
where Muslims want to come to live here.
Yes.
Hindus want to come to live here, and we welcome them. We protect their rights.
Mhm.
And so AOC wants to destroy it.
Incredible. We come in we have a few more minutes, and just to go back to the main the priorities. When you win, what will be your first thing you're planning to do?
In a district that's been gerrymandered and votes 70%
Yes, I know.
Democrat, my goal is to just get this message out.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so I would ask everybody to go to votepurves.org.
Mm-hmm.
Winning is not likely, Laura, but if we can just get this message out that
Yes.
there is a solution to racial equality,
Yes.
that I am for 21 years or 24 years, I have been embracing the progressive goal
Yes.
of ending gun violence, all violence. That's what we didn't talk about, the Ten Commandments and that.
Yes.
And erasing racial inequality, and my opponent in 28 years has done nothing about it, except
Okay.
spend more money on it. She's been subsidizing racial inequality for 28 years. So visit votepurvis.org. Now we have a problem spelling the word purpose.
Yes.
So I bought 6 domain names
Okay.
with all the misspellings of Purvis I could think of.
Okay.
So you can spell it, but the right spelling is VOTE, P as in Paul, UR, V as in Victor, ES.com. And also go to my Facebook page, Vote Purvis, like it, and direct. My only hope really, because I filed late, my wife died a month ago, I'm way behind in my campaign. My only hope is really social media.
Well, thank you very much. We are going to post all your information in our Facebook page and also in our YouTube. Thank you very much. And I will invite Arthur to come back in 2 weeks to continue this conversation because you have so much to share that we wanted to have you again.
We have climate change and guns and so forth.
Thank you very much. So.
So is that 30 minutes?